A millionaire was told his son had died during a school camping trip, but he didn't believe it, not until he dug up the grave himself, and what he found inside left him frozen in place. Click. The soft scratch of a pencil touched paper. In the second-floor room, bathed in golden afternoon light, 9-year-old Andrew Morrow was drawing, slowly, deliberately, each line made with care. Outside the window, the lawn sprinkler spun in lazy circles, misting the freshly cut grass with tiny droplets. The neighbor's grey cat lay sprawled in the sun, belly up, completely relaxed. It was one of those May days, so perfectly calm and clear, you'd think it might last forever. No one knew it would be one of the last peaceful days in that very house. Andrew put his pencil down. He stepped out of his room and padded quietly down the hallway. Each step left a gentle imprint on the plush carpet, like traces of passing time. He found his father, Walter Morrow, in his home office, still in his navy blue suit, a laptop glowing in front of him, half a string of emails left unsent. Walter was the CEO of a major tech company in Seattle. Since losing his wife to cancer, he'd poured every ounce of himself into work, except for the time he carved out for Andrew. Every morning, they shared a quiet breakfast, and every night, no matter how busy he was, Walter tucked his son into bed himself and read him a passage from whatever book they were going through. That week, Horizon Elementary announced a 2-day field trip for the 4th graders, camping at a lake about 100 miles from the city. It wasn't Andrew's first time away from home, but it would be his first overnight trip without any family going along. Walter said no at first. He didn't like the idea of Andrew sleeping somewhere without professional security. But Andrew begged. "Do you promise?" he asked. "When I get back, you won't work anymore that weekend. You'll take me skiing, like you said." Walter closed the laptop. His eyes didn't leave his son, who was standing at the foot of the stairs in a sky-blue hoodie, wearing a watch his father had designed himself. No internet connection, just an internal GPS and a bright orange SOS button. "I promise," Walter said. The next morning, Walter drove Andrew to school himself. They didn't talk much during the ride. Andrew liked listening to classical music, while Walter stayed focused on the road. When they arrived, the boy quickly joined a group of classmates waiting for the field trip bus. Walter stood silently by the curb. He wasn't the kind of father who waved goodbye, but that day, as Andrew climbed onto the bus, he turned around, smiled, and raised his hand in a quick wave. Sunlight slanted through the foggy window, casting a glow over the boy's eyes. The bus pulled away. Walter remained there for a few minutes until every trace of laughter from the schoolyard had faded. That evening, he reopened the dashcam feed installed in Andrew's backpack, a compact device disguised as a zipper pull, meant to protect children from abduction. The footage played normally at first. Clips of the kids joking around on the bus, the teacher taking roll, the soft rumble of the engine. Until minute 42, the footage froze, the signal broke up, and then nothing. Walter frowned. He checked the connection. The data was intact, but the signal was completely gone after that point. Before he could run a remote diagnostics command, his phone rang. "Mr. Morrow." A calm male voice, emotionless and steady. "I'm listening," Walter replied, eyes still fixed on his laptop screen, where the words, "Dad, we're going skiing tomorrow," had just been sent the night before. "I'm terribly sorry. There's been an accident at the lake. During a canoeing activity, one of the boats capsized. The rescue team recovered a boy's body. We've confirmed it's Andrew." Walter shot up, knocking over his coffee. The liquid spread across the desk like the shockwave of those words. He hadn't fully processed what he'd just heard. "What did you say?" His voice was dry, cracking. "We've been in contact with local authorities," the voice continued, still as steady as if reading a script. "To ease the burden on your family, Horizon School will take care of the funeral arrangements. The casket has already been sealed due to severe water damage to the body. Walter didn't respond, but as if sensing his growing suspicion, the caller added, "We'll send over the forensic confirmation and photo identification right away." Less than 2 minutes later, Walter's phone vibrated, an email from Horizon School. It contained 3 attachments. The first, a photo of a pair of small grey Converse sneakers, soles worn down exactly where Andrew used to drag his feet on the way to class. The second, a scanned student ID wristband with a QR code. It pulled up, Andrew Jordan Morrow, grade 4. The third, a preliminary death report signed by local police stating, "No foul play suspected, cause, capsized canoe during high winds," stamped in red with an official signature and a coroner's file number. Walter read through everything carefully. It was all too perfect, too complete, too fast. "How could they?" he whispered. "It's only been half a day, and they already have a full autopsy report." At the bottom of the email, a brief note had been added. "In keeping with humane protocol, the funeral has been scheduled within 48 hours in accordance with state guidelines. All expenses will be covered by the school." Walter sank into the chair behind him. His mind was a storm. He could still picture Andrew's face from the night before, smiling as he talked excitedly about the trip. And now, the only things left were 3 sterile images and an email stamped in bold. Confirmed. Deceased. He looked up at the coat rack. Andrew's small jacket was still hanging there, the sleeve stained with a faint streak of strawberry syrup. The boy never left home without it. Walter closed his eyes. Something inside him didn't sit right. A hairline crack had just formed in the perfectly sealed tragedy, thin as a strand of silk, but undeniable. And no one could have foreseen that from that fracture. A horrifying truth was about to claw its way out of the darkness. The morning of the funeral, a light rain was falling. Walter didn't change into black. He wore an old white shirt, the kind Andrew used to hate because it looks like a doctor's shirt. It was unpressed, the collar wrinkled, the second button misaligned. But he didn't care. Everything had been arranged in advance. Too quickly. The funeral home, called Eden Hills, was only a 15-minute drive from the school district. Horizon School handled the entire event, from guest reception and invitation lists to printing the eulogy. Walter arrived 5 minutes late. Not intentionally, but he didn't rush either. Inside the main hall, everyone was already seated, a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Parents he vaguely recognized from school meetings now sat with their heads bowed, as if trying to make sense of how tragedy had struck so close. A few children in tiny suits sat wide-eyed, too young to fully grasp what was happening. The casket rested in the center of the room, covered in grey velvet, lid firmly shut. On top was a photo of Andrew, taken during last year's Halloween, in the astronaut costume he wore when he said, "I want to be the first person on Mars before Elon Musk can get there." Under the soft yellow lighting of the funeral home, Walter walked forward as if his legs were sinking into concrete. When he reached the casket, he bowed his head slightly, not out of formality, but out of habit. There had once been a night when Andrew had a high fever, and Walter had sat hunched beside his bed all night, watching the thermometer, too afraid to look away even for a moment. The assistant principal, Mr. Brenner, stepped up quietly, keeping a respectful distance, hands clasped behind his back. When Walter's fingers touched the brass handle on the lid, Mr. Brenner quickly glanced toward the 2 funeral home staff standing nearby. One of them understood immediately, stepped forward, and discreetly secured the latch with a small tool pulled from his vest pocket. Mr. Brenner offered a tight smile, his voice carefully composed. "We were advised. The body suffered significant trauma from the impact, and prolonged exposure to water. We felt it best not to leave the family with a disturbing memory. Walter didn't respond, but his eyes lingered on the coffin's hinge, as if listening to an explanation that didn't quite hold up, silently wondering why they were so afraid of him seeing his own son. When it was his turn to speak, Walter said very little. My son liked silence. Maybe that's why I won't say much today. And then he sat down. One of Andrew's classmates broke down in tears. A mother quickly handed over a tissue. As the line of mourners took turns placing floral lids atop the casket, Walter did the same. But as he leaned forward, his hand froze. On the right hinge, where the lid connected to the body of the coffin, was a scratch about an inch long. A raw strip of exposed metal glinted along the edge, as if someone had pried it open with a hard object, and then shut it hastily. He didn't touch it, just looked. A breath, held longer than usual. That night, the only light in Walter's apartment came from the kitchen lamp and the glow of his laptop screen. On the table lay a condolence letter, printed on embossed stationery from Horizon Academy. It seemed flawless until Walter reached the final line. We extend our deepest sympathies for your family's loss of Andrew Jameson Morrow. Jameson? His son's middle name was Jordan, not Jameson. A simple mistake, maybe a typo, or a line copied from an old template. But for Walter, the error struck like a rivet into drywall. An invisible crack had begun to spread. He replayed Andrew's dashcam footage. The screen displayed timestamp after timestamp, second by second. The first video showed students boarding the bus, laughing, chatting. Andrew sat in the third row by the window, wearing headphones, occasionally turning to smile at a friend. At the 42-minute mark, the signal cut out. Suddenly, no sound, no picture. Walter examined the system files. No technical error, no network drop, no battery issue. The camera hadn't shut down on its own. It had been deliberately disconnected from an external source. And most critically, there was no footage of the field trip itself. No lake, no tents. Nothing to prove that the trip had happened the way they said it did. Walter braced himself on the table, took a long, steady breath. His eyes rose to the map on the wall, the one he used to pin each place he and Andrew had visited together. The lake where the school reported the accident was just a small dot, far from the city, but the GPS on Andrew's backpack showed no trail leading there at all. He picked up his phone, scrolled to the school's contact number. His finger hovered over the screen. He didn't call. He didn't text. Instead, he reopened the final footage just before the signal cut out. He paused at timestamp 00:42:17. Andrew was staring out the window, one hand loosely holding his headphones. For a brief second, Andrew turned toward the camera, looked directly at it, as if he knew the person on the other side would one day see it. Walter zoomed in on the frame. Reflected in the boy's glasses was a blurry image. A dirt road, not pavement. The bus had never gotten on the highway route to the lake. He placed his hand on the mouse. The screen dimmed as the power-saving mode kicked in, but Walter didn't move. His head slowly lifted. In the silence of the room, his voice came, quiet, almost like a private confession. They never went there. Walter didn't sleep, after the words slipped out in the middle of the night. They never went there. He began working through each step, like a programmer debugging a corrupted line of code. No rush, no oversight. By 8 a.m. the next morning, he was standing at the front desk of the West Hill County Police Department. The officer on duty looked up and recognized him immediately. Not because of Walter's reputation, but because of yesterday's funeral. The news headline, Andrew Morrow, only son of tech billionaire, dies on school trip, had aired on the morning news just hours earlier. Walter kept it brief. "I'm here to request a copy of the accident scene report." The officer hesitated slightly. "We're still finalizing the paperwork. Since the body's been identified, the report is being held internally for now. You might want to start with Horizon School instead." Walter didn't look away. "I'm not asking for a death certificate. I want the coordinates of the accident site, the rescue timeline, and the names of the response team members." The officer squinted. Walter calmly presented a high-level security clearance badge with his name and credentials, the kind used in classified federal cybersecurity projects where he once served as an advisor. It was still valid. 15 minutes later, Walter sat in the waiting room with a thin folder in front of him, just 6 pages. A young officer named Carson stood nearby, watching him with a hint of concern. "To be honest," Carson said, "this report was sent over as a summary, mostly compiled by Horizon School. We just confirmed the remains and transferred them to the funeral home. As for the rest, none of my team actually witnessed anything firsthand." Walter turned to the first page. The report read, "A group of students was involved in an accident during a canoeing practice on Arrowpine Lake. A sudden gust of wind overturned the boat. 3 students fell into the water. 2 were rescued. 1 did not survive. Andrew Morrow." But right below that, the section confirming the time of the accident was blank. The GPS location entry, blank. The list of witnesses, no names provided. "No one saw the accident?" Walter asked. Carson shifted uncomfortably. "They said all the students were evacuated after the incident. Maybe the information hasn't been fully updated yet." Walter closed the file. "And this Arrowpine Lake, are you sure it even exists?" Carson blinked. "It does. It's on the western edge of Ridgewater Forest. We used to run summer training programs there." Walter nodded. "Then I'll go there." That afternoon, Walter drove west. About 90 miles later, he reached the junction leading into Ridgewater Forest. Google Maps clearly marked Arrowpine Lake. But when he pulled up to the supposed entrance, all he saw was a rusted gate and a sign. "Private property, no trespassing." No road in, no ranger station, no sign of buses or students having passed through recently. Walter turned around and pulled into a small gas station 3 miles back. He approached the owner, an older man wiping down the pump glass. "Arrowpine Lake," the man frowned. "Planning to fish?" "No," Walter replied. "I heard there was a child accident there last week." The man looked up and stared at him for a long moment. "I've lived here 28 years. It rained last week, that's all. No accidents on the lake. And just so you know, Arrowpine Lake's been dried up for nearly 3 years. They rerouted the water with a dam." Walter didn't answer. He simply looked down at the paper map in his hands and slowly crossed out the words Arrowpine Lake with a red ink pen. That evening, back home, Walter accessed the internal GPS system built into Andrew's school bag, a model equipped with an embedded tracker, not reliant on any external network. The map recorded the school bus's route leaving Horizon School at exactly 7:32 a.m., matching the time Walter had waved goodbye to his son. The bus traveled southwest for 27 minutes, then turned off the main road onto an unnamed rural path. No traffic cameras, no checkpoints. The GPS signal stopped at 8:09 a.m. at a vague coordinate near an abandoned warehouse listed in the county records as vacant since 2011. Walter zoomed in on the map. That area was nearly 50 miles from Arrowpine Lake. There was no lake, no water at all. He replayed the final segment of the backpack camera footage at timestamp 00:42:17. Andrew was still gazing out the window of the bus. The wind ruffled his hair, and reflected in the glass was a red dirt road, thick with dust and rotting trees lining the shoulder. Nothing resembled a tourist area. Walter sat in silence. Then he picked up his phone and called an old contact, Clara Dorsey, a former FBI agent. When she picked up, he didn't greet her. He simply said 4 clipped words, "I need to find someone." And in that moment, he knew. A truth was beginning to take shape in his mind. And what he was doing now was confirming it. For an entire week after the funeral, he hadn't slept. Not because of grief, but because of the absurdities. The little things that wouldn't leave him alone. Like the death certificate misspelling his son's middle name. Like the scratch on the coffin hinge he'd caught a fleeting glimpse of. And the soft whisper from a funeral staff member, "Do you want to open it?" But I wouldn't recommend it. Walter knew the legal risks all too well. He couldn't exhume a grave without a court order. But if he waited for the system to respond, the truth would be buried forever beneath that soil. He needed to know. Now, crack. The sound of a shovel hitting wood echoed through the quiet cemetery. It was still dark. The fog hung thick. But Walter Morrow was already there, hunched over, digging since midnight. He wore a black overcoat, leather gloves, and a hood pulled low to shadow his face. No cameras, no witnesses, just him and the grave of his own son. A week ago, the coffin had been buried in a formal ceremony. But that was when the questions began, the hastily locked lid, the tiny scratch on the hinge, and above all, the condolence letter from the school, with Andrew's middle name printed incorrectly. Tonight, he needed the truth, even if it was the worst kind of truth. When the last of the dirt was cleared away, Walter took a deep breath, braced himself on the edge of the grave, and began unscrewing the bolts, sealing the coffin shut. The hinges creaked. The lid popped open. Empty. No body. Nothing inside but a layer of white cloth, flattened against the wood, as if it had been placed there just for show. Walter stumbled back, cold sweat running down his spine. Though it was only 45 degrees Fahrenheit, his throat tightened. But his mind focused on one single, harrowing thought. His son wasn't dead. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't drowning. It was abduction. He didn't call the police. He didn't alert the media. He didn't tell a soul. It wasn't that he lacked faith in the law. It was because he knew all too well how the law reacts to things that lack clear evidence. An empty coffin, a grainy video, a name once investigated, then cleared. To law enforcement, it was all just speculation. Walter didn't have solid proof, but he had something even stronger, a father's intuition, and that intuition was pounding in his chest, screaming that his son was still alive. The next morning, Walter didn't show up at the company. He sat in his high-rise apartment in front of 3 computer monitors, all downloading different streams of data. The last known GPS signal from Andrew's backpack, a topographical map of the state of Washington, and a blank window, ready for any clue that might come in. No announcement, no outward sign, just one email, sent in silence. I need the complete personnel records for Horizon from the past 6 months. Prioritize anyone hired outside the official HR process. The more detail, the better. 12 minutes later, a reply popped up. Not free. Double the rate for rush priority. Same payment method? Walter confirmed without bargaining. The recipient was Reddick, a hacker formerly tied to the CIA, known for his discretion and his refusal to ask questions. 2 hours later, the data started coming in. Walter sorted every personnel file by hiring date. One name jumped out instantly: Nathan Boyd, part-time extracurricular aide. The contract showed precisely 7 days of work, from March 8th to March 14th, the exact week Andrew disappeared. No valid social security number, no academic credentials, no profile photo, registered address, a temporary rental in Spokane, over 300 miles from the school. Payment issued from a peripheral, non-disclosed fund. Walter gripped the arm of his chair tightly. His gut had been right. Reddick called within the hour. This guy was investigated in a human trafficking case in New Mexico back in 2018. No convictions, not enough evidence. There's video, but it's grainy. Walter asked him to send it immediately. When he opened the file, his eyes stayed locked on the screen. A young boy being yanked from a vehicle, head down, wrists bound. A light blue jacket with diagonal reflective stripes, identical to the one Andrew wore at the day he left home. The boy struggled as he was forced into the bed of a pickup truck. The door slammed shut, no face. But that frame, it could only be his son. That same night, Walter drove out to the last known GPS location from Andrew's backpack, an abandoned warehouse deep in the forest near the hiking trails. No listed address, no power, no sign of life, except for the dead silence. He brought a flashlight, gloves, and a crowbar. The main door was locked, but a side entrance had a broken hinge. Inside, the air was thick with dust, but fresh shoe prints marked the floor. When he peeled back the blue tarp in the far corner of the room, a steel door appeared behind a layer of plywood. Low, handleless. Only a pair of horizontal hinges caked in time-worn grime. He pried it open with the crowbar. The screech of metal tore through the silence like a warning. A rush of cold air surged upward. A staircase descended into the basement. With every step, the stench of mold and something else. Dried blood grew stronger. The wall to the left showed faint scratch marks, and in the corner, under the beam of his flashlight, a scrawled message emerged. "I don't want to be taken again." Walter froze. At the end of the corridor, another door waited, and the first lie had just been exposed. Walter returned home at 3 a.m. His clothes were covered in the smell of soil, and his hands still bore the stains from the metallic dust beneath the hatch door. But he didn't head to the bedroom, nor did he take a shower. Instead, he sat down at his desk and reopened the Horizon School file on his computer. The screen glowed dimly in the dark, casting a cold, concrete grey hue across his face. It couldn't have been just Andrew. That basement door wasn't built to imprison just one child. The level of concealment, warehouse, trail, layered passageways, required more than a week's worth of effort. It was part of a system, one that had been running long before. Walter reopened Horizon's staff records, this time sorted by year. Over the past 7 years, an average of 1 to 2 student deaths had occurred annually, each one labeled as an accident: drowning, bus crash, stairwell fall, anaphylactic shock, all listed as isolated incidents. He wrote down every student's name, 11 in total. Then, he began searching for their families, through social media, archived newspapers, even using the Parent Association's internal contact list he once found pointless. That afternoon, Walter sat at a small cafe on the outskirts of Tacoma. The 3 chairs around him remained empty. He didn't know who, if anyone, would show up. But the first to arrive was Maggie Ruiz, a single mother in her 30s, wearing a grey coat, dark circles beneath her eyes, like someone who hadn't slept in days. "You're the father of that boy, Andrew?" she asked. Walter nodded. She sat down, gripping her coffee cup, but not drinking. "My son was Mateo. Died in 2021. They said it was a bus accident. But I never got to see him one last time. Closed casket funeral. They said the body was too badly burned, but I never smelled smoke. No one at the hospital confirmed anything." She paused. Her eyes turned red. "And I know he wasn't the first." Walter didn't ask anything. He simply handed her the list. 11 names already printed out. Maggie stared at it, trembling. Her finger pointed to 3 others. "They reached out to me once, but after a while, silence. That night, Walter returned to his office. Slipped under the door was an envelope. No return address, no recipient name. Inside was a black USB stick. No label, no note. Just a small, oddly pristine device. He didn't use his main computer to open it. Instead, he powered up a secondary laptop, the one reserved for scanning suspicious data, and plugged in the USB under high security mode. There was only one folder. The name read, Inventory 17. Inside was a spreadsheet file. Child's name, age, date missing, ID code, status, alive, weak, unresponsive, export category, G1 to G3 to G5. Walter read each line. Mateo's name, Maggie's son, was listed on row 4. Classification, G2. Beside it, a note, compliant, easy to manage. The further he scrolled, the colder his stomach turned. Row 17, Andrew Jordan Morrow, G5. Status, alive, premium, isolated from group. Walter couldn't breathe for several seconds. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a shock that surged straight to his heart. He opened the folder labeled IMG. 16 image files, numbered 01 through 17. Each one showed a child, pale-faced, sunken-eyed, bathed in sterile light. Some had their eyes closed. Some stared toward the corner of the room. A few had the same background, peeling concrete walls, a metal grate behind them, a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. File number 17. Andrew. His eyes were wide open. No blood, no tears, but the fear was unmistakable. He was staring directly into the lens, as if he knew his father would one day see it. Walter rose from his chair, but his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the floor, still clutching the screen. No tears, just gripping the blue hoodie Andrew had once hung on the back of his chair. The office was silent, but the security camera was still recording. He looked straight into the lens and spoke through clenched teeth. I will turn over every inch of this earth, and I will bring my son home. Walter sat motionless in the darkness of his office, the only light coming from the computer screen, where dozens of folders, names, and encrypted codes flickered on the data board retrieved from the USB drive. Among all the blurry images, he paused on a single photo, one that showed 2 children, one in shadow, the other visible. The girl stood next to Andrew, her face pale, her hands bound with white plastic ties. On her back, in red marker, someone had written, E. Grant, February 23rd. Walter narrowed his eyes. He zoomed in on each detail, carefully examining the concrete wall structure, the sliver of light coming through a crack in the door, even the dried blood near the children's feet. Every detail pointed to one thing. This wasn't a doctored photo, and the girl, not Andrew, was the only verifiable lead he had. He whispered, Grant. Elsie Grant. He pulled up the database of missing persons, and just as he suspected, Elsie Grant, 12 years old, disappeared during a school field trip to a museum near Seattle. Never found. Walter leaned on the desk. A part of him wanted to drop everything and go search for his son. But he knew, if Andrew was alive, he was being held just like Elsie, inside a mobile and tightly controlled system. If he made too much noise or moved in the wrong direction, he could make his son vanish forever. Find Elsie first. That means tracing the pipeline. That means saving Andrew before they get him across the border. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A woman's voice came through, steady and clear. Mr. Morrow? I need to find someone. Her name is Elsie Grant. I have a photo. She's standing next to my son in what looks like a holding cell. A pause, then the sound of papers being shuffled. Her voice dropped. We had a file on her case, but it was shut down. If your photo's real, I'll meet with you. But I'm warning you, if that truly is the girl, then you've just opened a very big door, and a very dangerous one. Walter looked back at the photo on the screen. Andrew's silhouette faded into the dark. But the girl beside him, she was the key, and he had no other choice. Clara Dorsey, former FBI agent, once credited with breaking nearly 20 interstate human trafficking rings before leaving the bureau after exposing a cover-up inside Georgia's task force, exhaled. "Send me the photo." Clara arranged to meet Walter at a roadside diner in the southern outskirts of Seattle. She wore a brown hoodie, her hair tied back, no makeup. "The girl in the photo, that's definitely Elsie Grant," Clara said flatly, after looking at the image. "She went missing a year ago. The school reported that she wandered off during a state history museum tour. But I found surveillance footage in the parking lot that showed a man pulling Elsie into a truck. The case was closed in 3 weeks. No one was ever charged." Walter took the USB out of his pocket and handed it to Clara. "I need to find where they're holding these children." Clara plugged the USB drive into her laptop. Within minutes, a location data encryption program opened, left behind by the sender, but cloaked with identity masking layers. She typed a string of commands. Coordinates appeared on the screen, the last known signal embedded in image number 15, which showed a background eerily similar to where Andrew and Elsie had stood. Clara frowned. "This is Hollow Creek Center, a juvenile rehabilitation facility operating under a license from a private foundation. It was once under investigation for student abuse, but no evidence was ever found." Walter narrowed his eyes. "Wasn't that place a former factory?" Clara nodded. "Yes, it was later renovated. On the surface, it's a behavioral rehab center, but the underground structure is bizarre. There are more sublevels than the standard design allows. I found blueprints in the city archives. The eastern wing isn't clearly labeled, just marked with internal codes." She pulled up a 3D map. A red line highlighted an underground passage linking the facility to the dormitory complex at Riverside School, where Andrew had been enrolled. "Walter," Clara said, meeting his eyes, "this isn't just a holding site, it's a transfer hub." Walter gripped the armrest of his chair. "You mean, the school, where kids are supposed to be safe, was working with these people?" Clara nodded again. "I cross-referenced the school's operational records, dates when students were expelled or went missing for disciplinary reasons. The timeline aligns almost exactly with the encrypted transport logs in Hal's data." Walter clenched the strap of his briefcase. His voice dropped, heavy with disbelief. "Hal was someone I trusted," Clara cut in. "And you weren't wrong to trust him. Hal was a tool, but a tool that could think. The plan he carried out, it was set in motion long before. The school receives funding from the Nielsen Foundation, where Hal used to serve as Chief Technology Officer. He funneled money to Hollow Creek through so-called educational grants. Everything on paper looks legal." Walter rose from his seat. His eyes burned with restrained fury. "So all this time, they've been hiding behind the mask of behavioral reform to legitimize abduction. And Hal, he was running the entire system from the shadows." Clara shut off the device. Her voice was firm. "We have to go. Tonight, before they move them again." Walter nodded. His eyes went still for a moment, as if picturing Andrew trapped in a cold room where there was no light and no promise of freedom. At 11:17 p.m., Walter and Clara parked nearly 300 meters from Hollow Creek. She carried a blueprint of the basement. He brought a high-powered flashlight, a camera, and an infrared recording device. Clara led him across a vacant lot behind the center, toward a service entrance, rarely used, secured by an old chain. She clipped the chain and opened the door without a sound. They slipped into the basement through a long corridor. The walls cast patchy shadows, and the hallway lights flickered like they could die at any second. Clara pointed toward a small door at the end. Down there is the holding level. I saw the leaked floor plan. They opened it. The air reeked of antiseptic. Just 3 steps down was a narrow passage lined with tiny rooms on both sides. Iron doors, crossbars. Inside, empty. But signs remained. Metal bunk beds, thin blankets, surveillance cameras mounted high in the corners. At the 5th door, Clara stopped. She peered through the slit. Someone's there. Walter stepped forward. In the dim hallway light, he saw a small girl curled up on a steel bed. Her wrists were strapped with fabric restraints. An IV line still clung to her left arm. Tangled red hair, pale skin. A dark bruise on one cheek. Clara pushed the door open. They entered. "Elsie?" Clara whispered. No response, but as Walter stepped closer, his shadow stretched across the floor, and slowly, the girl's eyes opened. Clara leaned down, checked the syringe line, and lowered her voice. "They just gave her a sedative. Mild suppressant." Walter knelt beside the bed. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked softly. The girl struggled to part her lips. "Elsie. Do you know Andrew?" A pause. Then, almost inaudibly, as if fading from consciousness, Elsie whispered, "Yes. He fought the bad men to save me." And her eyes gently closed again. Walter sat in silence beside the steel bed for a few more seconds. He didn't cry. Clara whispered, "We need to go now. I'll call in backup." Walter kept looking at Elsie. His hand clenched the photo of Andrew from his jacket pocket. That boy had fought to protect someone else. He wasn't dead. He was still out there, still fighting. And Walter knew this search was only just beginning. Denver, Colorado. On the 3rd floor of the Grand Summit Hotel, the conference titled "The Future of Sports for At-Risk Youth" was little more than a polished label, backed by a vague minor investment fund with no traceable origin. Walter walked in at 10:12 a.m., blending seamlessly among faux sponsors and so-called coaches with checkered pasts. He wore a graphite-colored trench coat, a crisp white shirt, and a thin black tie. Not flashy, but just polished enough to warrant a second glance. The name tag on his chest read, "Evan King, North Ridge Fund." In his hand, he held a tablet loaded with files on a simulated sports training program, data carefully crafted to look legitimate, sophisticated enough to pass any casual inspection. His target, Hal Crenshaw. Once a high school football coach, Hal now operated as an unofficial coordinator for questionable training programs scattered across the American South. Walter spotted him at the far end of the lounge. Hal was speaking to a red-haired woman, then casually lifted a cup of coffee and made his way toward the corridor. Walter waited for that exact moment. ChatGPT Jan Noy. The approach. Walter stepped forward with a faint smile. "Coach Crenshaw?" Hal turned around and nodded. "That's right." "And you are?" Walter extended his hand. "Evan King, from North Ridge. We helped sponsor a summer football camp down in southern Arizona last year. I heard you used to handle recruitment for similar programs." Hal shook his head slightly. "I'm not really involved in recruiting much anymore." Walter let out a dry chuckle, as if he understood the unspoken part. "Yeah, all that paperwork lately. We do things differently. Quiet, results-oriented. We only invest when a group of kids actually knows how to follow orders." Hal raised an eyebrow. Walter could see the cautious flicker behind his eyes. Walter lowered his voice. "I don't want to waste your time, so I'll get straight to it. Is there a place down south, near the border, where kids can show up without having to present any documentation?" Hal didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip of his coffee, as if weighing something. Walter continued, sliding a tablet toward him. The screen displayed a list of special training centers, none with publicly listed addresses. We're looking for a third site, a place we can route recruits into Mexico without going through the usual inspection process. A kind of transfer hub. Hal flipped through the pages. His demeanor began to shift. You're asking the right guy, but the place you need isn't on this list. Walter leaned in. Then where should I look? Hal glanced around. There's a camp in Sonora, no official name. We call it Arista South. On the surface, it's a soccer center, but inside, no one needs a birth certificate. Walter nodded slowly. Who runs it? Hal hesitated. No one knows his real name. They call him Dumas. Whenever he shows up, everyone just holds their breath. Walter didn't react. He just smiled. Sounds like a reliable coordinator. Hal looked him straight in the eye. That camp doesn't take walk-ins. If you want in, you need a referral. Walter slid the tablet back into his bag. And you're someone who can give one. Hal paused a few seconds. Depends what you need from that place. Walter set his cup down. We had a former recruit. Selected by mistake. The kid disappeared after a training cycle out west in Washington. I need to make sure he didn't end up there. Hal smirked. That place doesn't accidentally take anyone. If he's there, someone brought him. Walter stood. Thanks for your honesty. Hal gave a slight chuckle. You'll need more than trust to walk through Arista's gate. As Walter walked away, he never looked back. But Hal's eyes followed him. The man had no idea he'd just been thoroughly mined, every word, every pause, by a father posing as an investor. And Walter, fading from the lobby's view, already had what he needed. A name, Arista South. A region, Sonora. And a ghost, Dumas. He didn't need to strike. He just needed to breathe at the right rhythm. And doors would open on their own. After meeting Hal at the seminar, Walter didn't return to his hotel right away. Instead, he drove straight to a rest stop near the airport, rented a small room, and opened his tablet to trace back every detail from Hal's vague statement. If the boy hasn't been exported yet, consider that lucky. And especially, Arista South. No name, no signage. But if someone gets in, it's because someone let them. Clara called just an hour later. I found a transaction code on an internal network linked to fake humanitarian organizations. It's for a special shipment departed from Sonora 3 days ago, and its final destination is Monterrey. Walter sat up instantly. Does the code match anything from the USB list? Clara typed quickly, then whispered, Yes. Code A11X. It matches the one attached to Andrew's name, and it just resurfaced 41 minutes ago at a secondary port in Monterrey. Delivery? Number on hold. The thermal scanner picked up that the container was removed from the main batch, possibly being handed off. Walter stood up and ripped a folded map from his coat pocket. Send me the exact coordinates, and get everything ready. We're going. Monterrey, Mexico. 3 a.m. Walter and Clara stepped out of the silver rental car, now coated in a fine layer of red dust. No streetlights, no sound. Only the moon cast a pale glow over the facade of an abandoned warehouse near the docks, once used to export lumber to Nordic countries. Now, it stood forgotten, rusted, silent. But according to the USB tracker, one of the containers linked to Andrew had left this site less than 20 minutes ago. Walter popped open the trunk. Inside was a case containing a thermal scanner, infrared flashlight, tranquilizer gun, all prepped by Clara. They hadn't called the police. There was no one they could trust. And if Andrew was still alive, every minute that passed pushed him closer to a point of no return. Inside the warehouse, everything was thick with dust. The concrete walls bore deep scratch marks. A large section of tile floor had been pried up, revealing metal plating beneath. Clara opened one of the crates marked "Composite Wood Panels for Lecture Halls." But when she forced it open, inside were hollow compartments, precisely the length of a grown person. "Not lumber," she said quietly. "They're trafficking people, disguised as humanitarian aid shipments or educational construction supplies." Walter spotted a metal trash bin. Inside was a small jacket, silver grey, identical to the one Andrew wore the day he disappeared. The sleeve was torn, stained with dried blood. Clara turned to him. One of the containers was just pulled from the system, code LX82-R03. It matches the one in Andrew's file. Walter clenched his fists. Which way did it go? Over the Sierra route, heading toward the Nuevo Laredo transfer station. After that, likely across the border. They jumped into the car, chasing the GPS signal. The mountain road was rough and pitch black. Every curve felt like it could end in a drop. The headlights swept across tree trunks and patches of barren earth. Neither of them spoke. They were fully locked in. Clara gripped the steering wheel. Walter scrolled through the GPS data as the car jolted violently over a pothole. The signal from the container was just 8 minutes ahead. Then, boom! A loud explosion from the rear tire. The vehicle spun out. Clara cranked the wheel with all her strength. The front of the car grazed the edge of a dirt embankment. Airbags deployed. The world spun. Walter staggered upright, blood trickling from his forehead. Clara had blacked out. He pulled her out of the car and hid her behind a low bush by the roadside. Another engine was approaching. A black SUV rolled in from the direction of the docks. No headlights, no siren. Just the dim beam of a flashlight sweeping across the row of containers like a predator scanning the area before cleaning up the scene. 3 men stepped out. Dark coats, combat boots. They walked with a slow, deliberate pace. But the menace was unmistakable. One of them raised a flashlight and swept the area. The beam moved, then stopped. His voice rang out, thick American accent, but dry like rusted steel. "You're not running anywhere now." Walter stood in front of the opened container, where Andrew was still curled up behind Clara. He said nothing, just quietly slipped a small knife from inside his sleeve, a folding blade, a survival gift from a friend trained in Israel. The lead man moved closer, flashlight now shining directly into Walter's face. He squinted, then let out a low, cruel laugh. "Well, well, the famous father from the papers. The one who dug up his kid's grave because he didn't believe he was dead, right?" Walter didn't flinch. His eyes were bloodshot, not from the wound, but from rage reaching its peak. His voice came out hoarse, each word a rasped promise. "That's right, and I'll keep digging. Until I find my real son." The man laughed louder, but the sound carried no amusement. He pulled a small device from his coat pocket, a military-grade infrared tracking chip. He held it up and gave it a slight shake. "Our buddy Hal didn't believe you'd be dumb enough to come all the way to Monterey, so he planted this in your hotel suitcase." He took another step forward. "As for us, we were just told to deal with anyone who got near the supply route." Walter glanced at Clara. She gave a faint nod. "Ready." The man went on, savoring the moment. Brave. But Andrew, he's not exactly in one piece anymore, assuming he's even alive. Walter didn't let him finish. Slash. He lunged forward. The blade drove deep into the man's upper arm. The man screamed, collapsing to the ground. The other 2 pulled weapons and charged. Walter spun, his hand gripping a metal flashlight, and smashed it into the second man's neck. The man crumpled, coughing violently. Right then, Clara, hidden behind a fuel drum, raised a tranquilizer gun. The dart shot clean into the third man's neck. He roared, staggered, and dropped. There was no time to check for injuries. Clara darted out. Walter bent down and grabbed the keys from the lead man's pocket. They both jumped into the black SUV, engine still running, ready to go. As Clara locked the doors, she whispered, "We still have time. That container, it hasn't crossed the border." I tracked the satellite signal. It's still west of Reynosa. Walter shifted into gear. The SUV screeched as it tore down the road, kicking up a trail of red dust behind them. In the rearview mirror, their old car was engulfed in flames, fire reflecting in the puddles of spilled oil. Walter gripped the steering wheel tighter, his eyes fixed, unblinking. "My son is locked in a metal box, being smuggled out of this country like cargo." He clenched his jaw, voice gravelly with rage. "And if I have to, I'll tear the whole damn world apart to stop it." The black SUV sped down the gravel-strewn dirt road leading to the old port area east of Monterey. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky had already turned a silvery grey. Cold wind slapped against the windshield as if urging them forward. Inside the vehicle, Walter gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Clara sat in the passenger seat, laptop on her lap, eyes locked on the blinking red dot on the map. Container 5 DA73. It stopped at Porto 6's transfer yard. Probably waiting to be hitched to a semi. "How many minutes do we have?" Walter asked. "If they follow procedure, they'll pair the cargo within 20 minutes and get it out of Mexico before sunrise. We'll get there first." The transfer yard emerged like a massive steel labyrinth. Refrigerated containers stacked as high as 3-story buildings, cranes swinging non-stop, creating a heavy, rumbling noise. No signage, no police, no customs officials. This wasn't a legal port. It was a silent transaction zone. Clara popped the rear hatch, pulled out a digital lock breaker and a stun gun. Walter slipped on a long black coat, a dagger hidden up his sleeve. 360-degree surveillance, Clara whispered. "I'll jam the signal for 90 seconds. After that, we have to stay out of sight." They weaved through the rows of containers, navigating narrow alleys that reeked of rust and diesel coolant. Every step could lead to an ambush. Then they stopped in front of the container marked 5DA73. Just as Clara began working the lock, the headlights of a pickup truck flared on in the distance, shining directly onto their backs. "Move!" Walter shouted. They dove to the sides. A burst of gunfire erupted, non-lethal rubber rounds meant to stun, but enough to know their cover was blown. "There are at least 3 of them, 1 in the truck, 2 approaching from the left row," Clara yelled. Walter drew his blade and sliced the last cable, shoving the container door open. A rush of cold air spilled out. In the dim glow of red emergency lights, dozens of silver thermal bags were stacked tightly inside. Clara flicked on her infrared flashlight and scanned quickly. "Bottom row, far left corner." While she scrambled forward, Walter fired the stun gun toward a guard who popped out from the left. The man dropped, but not before he could blow his whistle. In the distance, a container truck blared its horn. "They're moving the cargo!" Clara shouted. Walter ripped through the insulation layer. Andrew. The boy was curled up, hands bound with cloth, eyes swollen, lips trembling. "Dad!" Walter choked back tears. He bent down and lifted the boy into his arms. "I'm here, son. You're safe now." At that very moment, a man in black lunged at them from behind. Clara spun around and fired the stun gun, hitting him square in the chest, but then more footsteps echoed from every direction. "Other way!" Walter shouted. Clara kicked open a side hatch on the container, revealing an emergency exit. They dashed through it, ducking as flashlight beams sliced through the darkness from all sides. An ATV carrying 2 guards swerved into their path. Without hesitation, Walter hurled his dagger straight into the front wheel, sending the vehicle flipping onto its side. Clara tossed a flash grenade. A blinding burst of light froze everyone in place. They ran full speed, Andrew wrapped tightly in Walter's coat, arms clinging to his father's neck. When they reached the lot, a container truck was reversing, blocking the exit. "Get in the pickup," Clara yelled. She unlocked the truck they had just taken down moments before. Walter jumped into the bed as Clara climbed behind the wheel. The pickup's tires screeched against the gravel, tearing through the narrow gap between two containers and veering sharply out of the transfer yard. Behind them, security trucks kicked into gear. Sirens wailed. Clara swerved through tight back roads, hugging the mountainside. Walter held Andrew close with one arm, using the other to fire the stun gun at the pursuing vehicles, buying them seconds at a time. At a sharp, slick curve, Clara whipped the wheel hard, causing two of the chase vehicles to collide with a metallic thud and a brief burst of flame. She shot through the dust and smoke, leaving the chaos and their pursuers far behind. 5:38 a.m. On a private hospital table in Monterey, Andrew was placed on the emergency bed. Nurses rushed in. The doctor said, "He's alive. Pulse is weak, but there's still reflex. Keep him warm and start IV fluids immediately." Walter sat beside the bed, holding his son's hand. Andrew whispered, his eyes too heavy to open. "Dad." Walter broke down in tears. After all the loss, the chasing and the pain, he had finally held on to his son. Not at a cemetery, but in the arms of the living, and the only thing left for him to do was to tear down the very system that had once kept his boy in the dark. 3 weeks after returning, Walter Morrow stood in the main chamber of the Washington Federal Court with Clara by his side, a woman who hadn't hesitated to risk her life for a child who shared no blood relation with her. Gone was the expensive suit he used to wear as a tech CEO. Today, Walter wore a wrinkled white shirt, its collar frayed, and a pair of faded khaki pants, looking like a man who had just walked out of a storm and hadn't had time to comb his hair. But his eyes, they burned, as if carrying the fire of an entire generation of parents. Clara leaned into the microphone. She didn't read a statement. Instead, she pressed Enter on her laptop. Behind them, the screen lit up with data from the USB drive, container route maps, shipping codes, and surveillance footage showing dozens of dazed children inside refrigerated freight units. We've verified that at least 17 children were stored like cargo. 11 of them have been located and rescued safely, all from the same export warehouse in Monterey. Clara's voice was calm, but each word sliced through the air like a scalpel. Thanks to the Special Operations Team from the anti-trafficking organization Child Shield, who intervened the moment we extracted the data. An image appeared on screen. Child Shield agents storming the warehouse 2 days after Andrew's rescue. The children, thin and trembling, were carried out of suffocating steel containers, some too stunned to cry. Clara continued. We also confirm that Horizon Academy and the non-profit Global Reach were directly involved in the student transfer process, disguised as field trips. With federal legal support, 3 headquarters in Colorado, Texas, and California have been sealed. 27 staff members have been taken into custody. 4 individuals who fled abroad are now under Interpol red notices. Behind Walter, the screen displayed the face of Brenner, the vice principal of Horizon Academy, during his preliminary hearing. The judge read the verdict. Charges: complicity in kidnapping, conspiracy in human trafficking, destruction of evidence, and aiding in the illegal transport of minors across borders. Sentence: life imprisonment without parole. Next came Coach Hal, who posed as a youth mentor but was convicted of luring and selling children under the guise of athletic scholarship opportunities. Sentence: 60 years in federal prison. And finally, the CEO of Global Reach, a once influential businessman, hailed as the godfather of humanitarian education, stood with his head bowed as the sentence was read aloud. Charge: mastermind behind an international child trafficking ring. Sentence: life imprisonment in Colorado's maximum security prison. Behind them, the sealed coffins had also been exhumed. 4 of them were empty. The truth, like a cold blade, cut through every excuse. A week later, Walter didn't return to his company. Instead, he founded Project Andrew, not as a memorial, but as a rebellion. Under special authorization from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, the organization was granted independent authority to investigate fraudulent educational institutions, monitor federal transport activity, and develop a nationwide student tracking system for all group field trips across the United States. All data is uniquely encrypted and cannot be altered by any third-party agency. On the brass plaque outside its Boston headquarters, only one line is engraved: "We will not let a single child disappear in silence." And Andrew, the boy whose name had once been erased from the record of the living, was still healing day by day. The new home he shared with his father sat on the edge of a pine forest near the Oregon coast. Every morning, he would sit by the window and draw, sunlight spilling across his unkempt hair, casting a soft glow over eyes that once trembled with fear, now carrying a trace of wonder, and slowly, hope. Clara often stopped by, bringing boxes of art supplies, and sometimes other children, those who had been rescued from the same warehouse as Andrew. They didn't speak much, but every time they looked at each other, their gaze said it all. We survived. One afternoon, Andrew handed Walter a drawing. It showed a boy standing on a dock, looking out across the open sea. In the distance, a blurry figure stood, back turned, waving. In the bottom corner, scrawled in messy handwriting, were the words, "I still see him. The man who pulled me out of the box." Walter held his son close. He didn't ask anything more. He simply pinned the drawing to the wall, next to photos labeled with the names of the children they'd rescued, the warehouses they'd exposed, and the men who were finally brought to justice. On the day Project Andrew was officially granted nationwide authorization, Walter invited families of missing children to attend the opening ceremony. There were no news crews, no cameras, just soft lighting, hands holding hands, and long, silent embraces. Andrew stood beside his father in a pale blue shirt. Once everyone had taken their seats, Walter pulled his son close, bowed his head, and spoke, his voice trembling but steady. My son's name was once carved into a gravestone. But starting today, it will be etched into the hearts of every child who was never called by their real name. Andrew looked up. The fear that once clouded his eyes had given way to clarity. He took the microphone from his father's hand and said, slowly, "My name is Andrew Jordan Morrow, and I'm still here." Some cried. Some reached for the hand beside them. Walter let out a laugh, not joyful, but weightless, the kind of laugh that escapes only when a burden that's crushed your chest for far too long is finally lifted. That day, there were no headlines, no hashtags. But those who were there would never forget. A father gave his son his name back, not with ink, not with stone, but with everything that remained of his heart. Not everyone is a billionaire, but everyone has someone they love enough to fight for, to defy a system, to search through the dark, just to bring them home. Walter's story wasn't just a father's journey, it was a reminder. Sometimes, the quiet instinct of love is the loudest truth. If it were you, what would you do when something just doesn't feel right? Would you trust your instincts, or believe what they tell you to believe? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I truly value what you share. Because this isn't just a storytelling channel, it's a space where we listen to each other. How are you doing these days? If you're going through something difficult, I hope this story gave you a little strength. And don't forget, if you need it, drink something warm, turn off your screen for a bit, and let your heart rest.